Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani. Welcome back to this YouTube channel that takes on everything about narcissism and how it affects us and what it does to us. And the punchline is it's not great. If you're new to this channel, welcome to this robust community that's actually quite helpful to each other in the comments. So hit that subscribe button, and we put out content every day. So if you want a notification when your narcissistic minute's going to happen each day, hit that bell and you'll get a notification. So today we're going to take on an interesting question, which is, what's the difference between empathy and enabling? It's a big one. A very common trope that arises in a narcissistic relationship, sort of a storyline of these narcissistic relationship, is the story of the empath and the narcissist. The empath is the benefit of the doubt rescuer. Everyone has good in them. Let's give them a second chance. We can make this work. I understand their point of view. I can feel their feelings kind of lover. The narcissist is the one-way street taker. And in the blink of an eye, you put a narcissist and an empath together, and you're watching a very toxic tango. So the question becomes, when does this never-ending, bottomless well of empathy that the empath offers go from empathy to enabling? And is there a difference between empathy and enabling? Let's break this down by starting to talk about empathy. We talk about empathy all the time, right? But really, what is it? I view it as empathy as being the awareness of, interest in, and presence with the emotional states of another person in a way that results in some kind of behavioral shift in us. And that behavioral shift might mean we listen to someone, we help someone, or we otherwise respond to that other person in a way that's consistent with understanding their feelings. Part B of empathy is something we call self-reflective capacity. That ability to be aware of your own impact on other people, to infer how other people may experience you, and shape or modify your behavior accordingly based on the temperature of the room, or at least the other person in the room with you. To empathize is to genuinely attempt to put yourself in the position or the mindset of the other person. The Oxford Dictionary defines empathy as the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. As you can see, my definition was a little bit talky. But at the core of empathy is the ability to resonate, care about, and pay attention to the feelings of other people, which in essence really just means being tapped into other people and caring about them. Empathy is good for us, and it's good for the world. When people feel seen and heard, they thrive. Too many people did not get consistent empathy when they needed it most, which was in childhood. And so they often crave it as adults, and they blossom in the presence of it. Now, I don't want this to devolve into a dissertation, which I could for hours, on how the world has become much more selfish, much more egocentric, and let's face it, technology is a big player in that. Listen, there was a time in history that empathy was a little bit more required just to get through the day. We human beings lived in small tribal structures, and we relied on each other for gathering and hunting and farming and trading and child rearing. I have no doubt those early tribes squabbled and fought a lot, but they had to be attuned to each other. Empathy as a survival trait seems to have lost some of its adaptive utility. And the fact is, though, that is harming everyone's mental health. So then what is enabling? Enabling is permitting or even sort of facilitating the maladaptive or unhealthy behavior of another person by not putting any consequences on their behavior, and going one step farther and even taking responsibility for another person's behavior. And the overall outcome of all of this is that it sort of strengthens and reinforces the bad behavior and the person behaving badly, where change is no longer likely or possible. The Oxford definition of enabling, interestingly, is to give the authority or means to do something. It's a little simple, right? In psychology, and actually this term really came up from the addiction literature, this term enabling really implied allowing drinking or drug use to be silently or quite literally supported, either because of fear or at some level to maintain control of the addict, or to create a universe of shared dysfunction where everyone was kind of keeping each other down so nobody could leave the system, right? So when does empathy become enabling? It's a very, very tricky question, and one I grappled with for a while, especially when it comes to narcissism. The challenge with empathy is that it works best, obviously, when it's a two-way street. For it to be a one-way street, for empathy to be a one-way street, the way it is with a narcissistic relationship, is really the equivalent on playing on a seesaw or a teeter-totter alone. However, empathy is really good and important for us to show, but we also need to be aware when our empathy is not being reciprocated in any way. It's actually really hard clinically to work with people on how do you keep your own empathy intact when it is not being reciprocated, especially in a primary relationship. But then to not try to rescue or teach the person who's not reciprocating. A lot of empaths believe that if you show another person enough empathy, including a narcissist, that they're going to come around, that the love will make them blossom, like a whole Beauty and the Beast thing. It doesn't work that way. Now, empathy becomes enabling when it becomes a major driver of those justifications we make. The empathy becomes the fuel for the justification. Things like, well, we really need to understand someone else's perspective, and everyone deserves a chance, and I can also see their point of view. In fact, understanding someone else's perspective is great, and it's healthy. It starts to become a problem when you do it and they don't. And that means that their behavior goes unaddressed. Empathy becomes actually a piece of this whole cognitive dissonance framework. The narcissist does a bad thing. We are in a relationship with that narcissist. We don't want conflict. We don't want to call them out. And then we use an empathy-based excuse to let them off the hook. Like, everyone deserves a chance, or I just need to work harder on being more loving towards them. What that does, though, is it breaks the dissonance, and then you avoid conflict, or you avoid the battle, or you avoid having to address it, and you get to maintain the status quo. Many people who are highly empathic are conflict averse. Conflict and fighting might have been unsettling from childhood. It may be related to histories of trauma. It may even be a sort of a fear of abandonment. But being afraid of conflict is also another key driver of enabling, particularly with narcissists who are so vindictive and conflictual. When people keep knitting second chances out of empathy, this idea of everyone deserves a chance, let's give them the benefit of the doubt. When people keep excluding bad behavior from this place of empathy, they didn't mean it, I understand why they did that. When we don't issue meaningful consequences on bad behavior, something like, I know lying or cheating is not okay, but aren't all of us human? Then we enable behavior. One could argue that maybe we aren't that different. We human beings are not that different from rats and mazes. Our behavior is shaped by the consequences that follow it. If the narcissist acts like an ass and you are still there just loving them up, why would they change their behavior? That empathy turns into enabling. I firmly believe that highly empathic people do not have to be enablers. Empathy is magnificent. It means empathizing with emotion. You can even empathize with a person's difficult life history and even understand how it could lead to bad behavior in the present time. You can also then say, yep, I get it, and your behavior is not acceptable. And you can set a boundary against it. Empathy starts getting confusing when it gets mixed up with our own neurotic struggles, our fear of abandonment, our fear of conflict, our fear of letting other people down, our fear of expressing our needs. Then we just sort of fall back on the virtue of empathy. I'm going to understand their point of view, instead of facing our own stuff as well. Enabling is why narcissistic relationships can actually literally last for lifetimes. And empathy can often be a bigger driver of that than you would think. Like I told you, I'm a huge fan of empathy. I believe it's a game changer and a life need, and it makes the world healthier. But I also believe that we need to understand that a person can be empathic and still issue meaningful behavioral consequences. A person can still set boundaries. A person can still disengage. The sad fact is that too much empathy gets wasted on trying to win people over, on the people who don't see it or don't get it. It's a bit like just letting a faucet run and they don't take advantage of it. And interestingly, the people who actually would benefit from the empathy often go thirsty because we're wasting it. Maybe it is that early life conflict of trying to win over and master over that unwinnable parent and get them to notice us that leads us to this. Another difficult issue is that, yes, many people who are narcissistic, yes, I understand they do have very difficult life histories at times. Trauma, loss, cold and remote parents, chaotic beginnings. And we want to show people like that empathy. And that's great. But again, the manipulation, which is at the core of narcissistic relationships, means that a narcissistic person will very quickly recognize that your empathy is the equivalent of a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is for this reason that forgiveness is such a challenging space in narcissistic relationships. Forgiveness, the act of forgiveness, is very much predicated on empathy. But with a narcissist, that forgiveness is enabling. While with those who are narcissistic, who are not narcissistic, so when you're with somebody who's not narcissistic, forgiveness can be redemptive and transformative. When it comes to forgiveness, you got to know your audience. It's a complex relationship between empathy and enabling. And sadly, people will often cite empathy as a reason for not setting boundaries or consequences. That seems a little hard on them, right? Acknowledging your own discomfort with setting boundaries is a first step. And perhaps the greatest challenge with empathy is that we show so little of it to ourselves. And frankly, if you can be empathic with yourself, you are not only going to be far better at bringing it to the world, you are also less likely to be an enabler. So to all the empaths out there, stop giving it away. It's time you started showing some of that empathy to yourselves. Don't blame yourselves, but recognize that boundaries are a really good thing, especially with narcissists. And the biggest takeaway, when we enable bad behavior in narcissists, it's just a matter of time before that enabled narcissistic person goes out and hurts somebody else. I really want to reiterate the point. Empathy is great. And before you all feel like you need to downregulate it, I'm saying that you can be wise and discerning with your empathy. You can feel it for someone, but empathy doesn't mean caving. Empathy doesn't mean enabling. Empathy means often seeing someone struggle and getting someone struggle and doing that really, really hard action of setting a line and setting a boundary. In many ways, that actually conforms to what has sometimes been called tough love, right? I get it. I love them. But if I keep this cycle going, this person is not only going to destroy us, they may very well destroy themselves. So please understand that your empathy is great. It's a necessary tool to get through the world. It's good for you. Just be careful that it doesn't become part of a larger structure of justification. Thanks again.